Hello everyone. I just wanted to share a few thoughts that have been on my mind in these days. I want to start with the meditation for day 15, which is in Celtic Daily Prayer Book 1, and it is also a Bible passage from Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 to 45. The unclean spirit. When an unclean spirit has gone out of someone, it wanders through dry places, seeking rest and finding none. Then it says, I will return into the house I came out of. And when it gets there, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings along 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter in and settle there. And the last state of that person was worse than the first. Even so shall it be with this evil generation. So I remember the first time I heard this passage, I thought, aha, I knew housework was dangerous. That's why I've so successfully avoided it all these years. But my second thought was, especially when I was first living at Nether Springs at Hetton Hall in 2006 on team for about 6 months. And I was sitting in chapel, and they came across this, and I thought, what in the world, of all the Bible passages, even of all the things Jesus ever said, why would these weird people pick this one to focus on, every 15th day of every month? And I remember actually, like in the chapel, when it was read out, kind of like peeking with one eye to see if anyone's face looked like how I felt on the inside. Just like, what? But they all looked, serene, like, yes, this is good, so I was like, okay. So it took me a long time to get a handle on this passage, and I'd like to be able to tell you that I really dug deep into it and went away and researched it and sat with it. But actually it was more like it just kept coming back around the 15th day of every month, and I had to sit with it and be mystified by it again and again, and confront these words of Jesus. A key for me, one of these 15th days of one of these months along the way, was I finally heard that it wasn't that the house was clean or tidy. It was that the house was empty. When they came back around, they found the house empty, and so they moved back in. Now, I've talked to a lot of people who grew up in a time when Sabbath was very religiously kept on a Sunday. I'm from the American South as well, and talking to other people, perhaps on Scottish islands and things like that, where it was like, no, you can't do the laundry out. You can't hang the laundry out. If you were a child, you weren't supposed to play with anything. You had to be quiet. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, you couldn't do this. There was just church and Bible reading, and it was a kind of a focus on all the things that you weren't allowed to do or supposed to do on the Sabbath day, and that seemed to be the point of it. But I think there's something about Sabbath where it's like the point isn't what you're not doing. Your point isn't an absence for the sake of absence. But the point would be the absence that creates the space for a different kind of presence and a different way of being. I remember being quite struck by something my pastoral care teacher talked to me about in New Jersey. Not just me, the whole class, but I remember he was talking passionately about the importance of boredom, especially for children. And I remember when I used to babysit for kids, and I was, like, oh, let's play with this, let's play with that, let's watch this, let's do this. And then if at any point they said, I'm bored, I would think, I failed as a babysitter. This is the worst thing if a kid is bored. It's kind of an indictment as well on the person that's supposed to be entertaining them, I suppose. But he was saying that it's really important to be bored, because unless you're bored, you don't know what you actually want to do. If it's always just about the next thing, or the next shiny object, or the next thing that's distracting you, then you don't have that chance to kind of let it all settle down, and then from the inside think, what is it that I want? What is it I want to do? What am I motivated toward? What am I drawn to? Not just what's been put in front of me, but what do I choose? And I think that's important for children as well as adults. Now, I know we've all had very different experiences of lockdown, and I think once we're all back together and also, again, in virtual ways, we can be sharing about how it's been for us. For me, at first, some of you saw the video that I did about keeping a monastic rhythm at home. That was certainly my intention. And I was looking forward, actually, to some of the ways I was going to tend my inner life, and as well as my garden and my marriage at home. But very soon after lockdown, it became apparent that both myself and my husband had COVID-19. And I have to say that's been nearly the whole of my experience since Nether Spring shut and the lockdown started, has just been kind of fighting for my own health and a very first-hand experience of this pandemic. It was harrowing, and the need to care for myself and for Pete and I to care for each other was kind of all-consuming. And all the monastic practice, not all of them, but, forget monastic rhythm. It was like, just sleep and exhaustion and trying to take care of yourself and all the rest of it. It had brought me, in a funny way, very close to the other humans through the centuries who have had to deal with plagues and Spanish flus and all the rest of it. All of that just felt like something far distant. Like, oh, I'm glad we're not living with rats everywhere on the streets and dealing with plague like those primitive earlier people. But here we are in the midst of that. And I've thought about Boisel, actually, at Melrose, and Cuthbert, who was with him as he died from the plague. And he asked Cuthbert to read to him from the Gospel of John. I would have thought, I would like to have, in the midst of the worst of COVID, to have longed to hear the words of the Gospel of John, or the capacity to have heard it. But even I'm not proud of it, really, but I just couldn't have even listened to Scripture at the worst of it. But I thought about dear Boisel, and in his last days, and the company that he had there with him. For me, what's happened in the midst of all of this, and maybe for you too, I don't know, is it's making me ask big questions. When my own life seemed at least precarious, I was thinking, what is my life for? What is the gift of life? I've certainly come out grateful in a different way. And in these, for me anyway, not having children at home and my primary work being changed, these empty stretches of time where I think, how do I want to spend my time? How do I tend myself? How do I choose wellness? How do I, if I have very limited energy, and I have, what do I choose to do with it? And then that makes you think, well, what's most important? Who's important? What do I choose? All of these questions have been first and foremost. And so there's a kind of gift, I think, that comes with the emptiness of time, or the spaciousness that some of us have experienced, where, well, and I think for all of us anyway, it's just, even if you're on the other end of the spectrum where life has gotten twice as busy and much, much more intense, we're holding you. And but I think regardless of what your experience has been like in terms of the demands of this time, the whole nature of it has made us think, what's important? What do we want? What's our priorities? What's the one thing that we need, or in this time, or in every time? So I think for me as well, it's coming back to, I don't just want my house to be empty. I don't just want to have the absence of the busyness. I don't just want to have the absence of COVID-19 from my body and my home and humanity, their entire world. But I want the presence. I want my house to be so full, the house of my body and my soul, as well as my physical house, to be so full that if any demons were to be passing by, they'd say, oop, there's no space for us here. We should keep moving, you know? And to think, what do I want to fill my life with? What do I want to fill my body with? What do I want to fill my house with? Because it seems to me the point isn't emptiness, but the point is fullness. And I think as well as we turn to the table and we think of what Jesus offers us in that first Last Supper and every remembrance of that sense is something of his own life, something of his own life force, something of his own self and his love, that we're invited to fill ourselves quite literally and physically with his life, with his love, with the gift of himself. So, however we do this, at home and virtually, I pray that you would, with me, allow yourself to receive the gift of the presence of Christ into your life and into your home and afresh in your relationships and into your work. Peace be with us in this time.